Welcome everybody to Life with Legends. I'm Justin Bell. If there was a unicorn in the pantheon of racing greats, then it would definitely be Sir Jackie Stewart. What a man. And maybe no other driver of his era made such huge contributions both on and off the racetrack to the overall professionalism as well as the safety aspects that undoubtedly saved tens of lives. Nicknamed the Flying Scot, he had a swift ascendancy up the racing ranks to Formula One, where he won the World Drivers' Championship 3 times. Surviving an era when he lost so many dear friends, Sir Jackie gave his whole life to making the sport better for everybody. Despite being a severe dyslexic, his business acumen is nothing short of brilliant, and his relationships with brands such as Rolex and Ford have lasted many decades. Throughout this amazing journey, he's enjoyed the support of his beautiful wife Helen. From the pit lane doing timing as they did back then, to the halls of royalty, they've been a dynamic duo. But now it's his time to be her rock, as she is suffering from Alzheimer's. But the difference is Sir Jackie is tackling this devastating disease with all his energy and resources and bringing together his vast network to find a cure. I met with Sir Jackie in the summer during a trip to the UK, and to spend just a few hours at his magnificent country estate was an honour, and hanging out with the dogs. Seeing the memorabilia from such a life made me appreciate even more who he really is and what he achieved. I do hope you're enjoying the conversation. It was really just fun in every way. And please visit lifewithlegends.com to view the limited edition portrait that I took of Sir Jackie, which is signed by him, with only 24 ever being printed. Thanks for listening, everybody, and enjoy the show. Well, Sir Jackie, thank you for having me in the house.
A pleasure.
Yeah, it's, I got to say, your name thinking about the past has been a big part of me doing this show, especially, with my dad's 80th on Tuesday when we were there, and everybody's reflection on the old days, and I was looking around the room, and I've interviewed Brian Redman, I've interviewed David Hobbs, and many others, and it just made me reflect that, we're sitting here now with all of this at the, at the tail end of an amazing career and life. But when you started, the common denominator was, a cheeky chappie that borrowed a car or borrowed some money or earned a little bit of money. And there was no great career plan, was there? There was no crystal ball into a professional life.
In my particular case, it happened because I was a garage mechanic.
Yeah.
I'm an extreme dyslexic. I can't read or write to this day. I don't know the words of our own national anthem or the Lord's Prayer even. I mean, dyslexia in my life has been very negative because it wasn't identified as I was a wee boy at school. So I couldn't get past my 11 plus and all of these sort of things.
Yeah.
So I became a garage mechanic, well, to begin with, serving petrol. And I made more money doing tips than I did in salary, and in fact was able to buy a brand new car. I think it was something like 6 weeks before I had to sit my driving license, a new Austin A30 it was, because I made that amount of money in tips and I wanted to have a car. So motor racing wasn't my life. Shooting was trap shooting, clay pigeon shooting, and it started with trap shooting in a normal sense, and then it went into Olympic trap. So I shot for Scotland and then for Great Britain. From the age of 14 until I was 24. And then it was an amateur sport, so I wasn't making any money. And I got married to Helen. So I couldn't continue running around the world. When I was shooting for Britain, of course, they paid my expenses, etc. But I just worked in the garage, but there was a very nice young man whose family were extremely rich, and they had a very important family company in Glasgow. But he was the only son, so he was allowed to have fancy cars, but he wasn't allowed to race them. So I was the mechanic for him getting other friends of his who were racing drivers at the time to drive those cars, and it was me who repaired them sometimes and certainly kept them hopefully in good nick. And as a result of that, one of them had a bit of a shunt which I had to repair. And he said, look, why don't you have a go? I said, well, no, I can't do that. And he said, why not? And I said, well, I've got a wife now and I don't want to do that. He said, yeah, do a sprint. So I did a sprint with these.
So there was no foreshadowing of greatness at this point?
Not at all.
You just thought, let me go and have a go?
No, not at all. I didn't have any ambitions to be a racing driver. So I didn't think. My brother was a racing driver, a very successful one for Acuria Course, for Jaguar, for Aston Martin works teams. But he retired after a couple of big shunts. And I wasn't looking towards being a racing driver at all. My shooting was my sport.
Yeah.
So in any case, I did the thing, and I finished second to somebody in a TVR, a very good young driver. And he said, oh, well, you better have another drive. So the other drive, I won. And then he started to buy cars that I could drive. He had a Marcos, which was laminated plywood. It was one of the most remarkable cars, aerodynamically very good, 1000cc, racing at Charter Hall in the borders of Scotland. I never went down south. And then one thing led to another. He got an AC Bristol, then he got an Aston, actually, a DB4 GT lightweight.
You'd like that now?
Aluminium body. And I drove that car and did quite well with it. And I was driving an E-Type Jaguar from time to time.
That's okay.
I'm sorry.
No, the dogs are doing fine.
Now,
they can have a run.
There's a car. Just give me 1 minute.
No worries.
There's a car going up. It's one of the gardeners working. Oh, it's very naughty, I know. I assume you can edit these things.
Oh, I can.
Yeah. Let me just see this fella through. Right, you can go.
Off they go.
I don't know where I like.
Well, they're very vicious-looking watchdogs.
Yes, they're frightening.
So he had an E-Type. An Aston.
I had the Aston GB4 GT, but there was an E-Type Jaguar, which was our demonstrator, because my dad had a garage that I worked in. Yeah. By which time my brother had retired from driving racing cars, and he was a good racing driver, but had a couple of big shunts, and my mother was against him driving, so he was the number one boy in the family. He was 7 or 8 years older than I am, or I was when he was born. So I was sort of probably a mistake at the time. So anyway, suddenly Acuria Course saw me driving and thought I should drive one of their cars, which was a big break for me. And I had no real ambitions to be a racing driver at all. So I drove for them in, lightweight events, but down south for the first time properly. And then Ken Tyrrell saw me. Yeah. So that's when it all began to get quite serious.
And I'm sure there wasn't a roadmap like there is now, right? I mean, any young driver goes, man or boy or girl, I want to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm karting, I'm going to get seen, I need a lot of money, and I'm going to be in Formula One. That's the,
right.
But
no, not at all.
There was almost a naive innocence to the trajectory, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So when Ken Tyrrell, I had the lap record at Goodwood in a sports car. Yeah. To Geno, it was one of his cars, and he also had a Cooper Monaco, which I held the lap record at Goodwood, and the then Goodwood manager said to Ken, if you're looking for a new driver, here's your man to have a go at. So I went down there and tested with the Formula 3 Cooper. I had never driven a single-seater car. He took me on, and we would run on most of the races we went into, including the Monaco Grand Prix of Formula 3, which meant that on the Sunday night I sat next to Princess Grace, and Helen sat next to Prince Rainier, which was a big deal.
So can you imagine, to put that into words, you're two Scottish simple folk that are now sitting with the royal family.
Yeah, well, a big deal.
Was it?
And we later were to become great friends.
Yeah.
For Paul and Mark, when they were born, we had holidays with them in the palace and so forth. It was a great relationship that started in a very modest way.
Yeah. Do you remember looking at each other, kind of going, what are we doing
well,
here?
Yes, we couldn't understand it, really. And of course, being a garage mechanic, with that sort of amount of money that I was getting every week in a wee garage, it wasn't a big garage, it was very small amounts of money. Suddenly to earn, £100 was a big deal, £1,000 which you couldn't believe. Yeah. So we were able to buy a house rather than a rented apartment. Yeah. A wee bungalow that was so wonderful. Paul was born there, etc. So the whole thing then took off almost too fast for me to, I suppose, really what I would call enjoy the elements of finding myself under these circumstances. Then within less than a year of Formula 3 being asked to be the number 2 driver for Graham Hill in a BRM, the works car. So then that was the rocket ship. And
so you're saying it was almost like it was moving so fast you didn't have time to take stock of it in a way.
No, the big advantage I had, I think, was that I had been fairly successful at shooting.
Yeah.
And therefore I didn't get over excited by a little bit of success, because I had already won the Scottish, the Irish, the Welsh, the English, the British, the European Mediterranean Championships shooting.
So you understood what winning meant.
And how not to win.
Yeah.
Or how not to lose, more importantly.
Yeah.
So I learned more from shooting in that respect than I did actually from racing cars, because when you shoot and you miss a target, you never get it back. It's now going to be
it's not another
99 out of 100.
Yeah.
In a racing car, you can make a wee mistake, and you can make it up the next third or fourth or 20th corner in some races, some tracks. So I learned a lot from shooting, and that was why I think I was spotted as we went along by the more, let's say, big time life. And Ken Tyrrell, of course, was in Formula 3, then took me to Formula 2, and then took me to Formula 1.
And he was a young man, relatively. I mean, he's older than you, but we look back now, I look at Ken as Ken, the old guy I knew, but he was trying he was equally trying to make his way.
And he did a tremendous job to become a works owner. Yeah. Because he built the cars in a woodshed in England in a very modest way, which he never changed.
Really?
It was still there, and in fact I think that same wooden shed's now going to be laid out in Goodwood for everyone to see that
what it was like.
3 world championships were made out of a wooden hut.
Yeah.
So he always had the best mechanics, and that's of course one of the biggest things. You've got to finish first you must finish.
Yeah.
And my mechanics with Ken Tyrrell were the best mechanics in the world, in my opinion. Yeah. I never drew blood from my body driving a racing car, because my cars were better than everybody else's. I didn't have mechanical failures because my cars were better prepared than anybody else's. So Ken Tyrrell was a great leader, and he had great mechanics. Yeah. And they're still here with us. One's sadly got dementia. Yeah. The lead mechanic.
Oh, okay.
And one's 94, and the other one is around.
Yeah.
3 major people who had an enormous part of my life to achieve what I achieved. Without them, I wouldn't have done it. Couldn't have done it. So the Ken Tyrrell thing was a wonderful relationship.
Interesting when you talk about the mechanics like that, because if you're a fan of racing and just someone that watches it on TV, the driver is that he's the sharp point of the spear, isn't he? Is the the tip of the iceberg. But I even, obviously having raced, when I look at Lewis walking back into the garage, congratulating his mechanics,
sure,
working with them. You saw Schumacher was brilliant at that. But it's actually a very intimate, simple relationship with your mechanic, because the last person that puts your seatbelts in is your mechanic.
Yeah. Well, there were no seatbelts
No,
when I started, and even in Formula One, there were no seatbelts. I went to Indianapolis to drive in '66, and you had to wear seatbelts, and I had never worn them before. And I said, no, I don't want to bother. You don't run then. You don't get out onto the track without seatbelts. And of course, by the end of the month of May, seatbelts, I came back and said, I need seatbelts in my Formula One car. So I was the first to put seatbelts in a Formula One car. So, yes, I mean, I learned such a lot. The other thing about sport, and particularly not so much team sport, but individual sports, is that you're so dependent on other people. And you choose other people. And Ken Tyrrell was superb at choosing good quality people.
Okay.
And therefore, when I drove, and in those days you had to drive other formulas to make any money, I drove only the best teams and the best cars, mostly within the best mechanics in each of those teams that I was able to race on, whether it was Ronnie Hoare with Ferraris or whether it was Ron, all sorts of drivers, all sorts of teams, Formula 2 teams for Lotus and so forth, when, I wasn't driving something else. We were driving a lot of races. I mean, 68 races a year we would drive, which today...
They can't even imagine it.
But it was the only way you could make money.
Yeah.
Because the contract, even for Formula One, wasn't very big. Yeah. So you had to do Indy, you had to do all the other events, to make a decent living. Yeah. And when you got to a certain level, then people were giving you rides, and you didn't have to take them, but you could choose only the best. So that's what I would do. In every case, I was always pretty much surrounded by the best people.
Do you think Jackie Stewart today would have existed without sort of almost that clarity that your dyslexia caused you, an attention to detail which didn't come naturally to you because you couldn't read, you were very observant with your eyes and environmentally to your environment, I mean, because it does, I mean, I know some incredibly successful people who are dyslexic, who almost have a hyper focus.
Well, I think when you are dyslexic, you're so out of touch with everything that when you do find something you're good at, you give it much more attention. Yeah. Much more attention. So I think Einstein was dyslexic. Yeah. Leonardo da Vinci was dyslexic. Yeah. Steven Spielberg's dyslexic. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of very clever folk are dyslexic. Muhammad Ali was dyslexic. Yeah. So when you're dyslexic, you've failed. At school, I was a complete disaster. I'd never passed my 11 plus ever. Yeah. And I was sent to a secondary school that was not very nice because I couldn't keep up with the others. Now, that gives you a bad feeling. Yeah. So when you find you're good at something, you're more focused, you're more into it, you're more hungry. Yeah. And that's what happened to me with my shooting. Yeah. And then that's what happened to me with my motor racing. Yeah. Just give me a minute, I'll let that dog.
Look, he's having the dog is...
They like their daddy, you see.
No, they like their daddy, they want to be in.
In you come. In you come. Oh dear, dear, dear. Did you have a good time out there chasing that truck?
Oh, I think so. They're like, but we're tired again now. That was a momentary bit of... Yeah. No, so I'm sure it does. You applied it all the way through your life.
Yes, so that lives... I mean, I still don't know the alphabet. Yeah. I still can't read or write. I can't write a letter to somebody because I can't.
But your negotiation skills are legendary.
That's different.
Yeah.
Because that's coming out. You're dealing with that, and you're more driven to get things done well.
Yeah.
Because it's the only thing you're good at. So you don't realise you're good at these things, I don't think, when it's happening. It's only later on you think, oh, that's amazing, how did you do that?
Yeah.
But you always had to hang out with the right people.
Yeah.
I've got a saying, if you fly with the crows, you're liable to be shot at. Crows are vermin.
Yeah.
If you soar with the eagles, you're above shot. So I hung out as much as I could with the best quality people.
Yeah.
And that goes from my accountant to my banker, but more importantly to my staff and to my mechanics.
Yeah.
And all of the people, whether it was a Ken Tyrrell or whether it was Stewart Grand Prix or Paul Stewart Racing before that. And we had more success because we had the right people, whether it was the marketing people, whether it was the engineering people, whether it was the racetrack people. So when you're a dyslexic, you need to have good people around you. You just can't do it without them, because you yourself, you feel you're not good enough to get something done. So you find the best person to do that. So that's true of my life. And I think, generally speaking, that's probably true for every extreme dyslexic. I mean, for me, not to be able to do the alphabet, ever, and for me not to be able to read and write correctly, now, at this age,
Remarkable.
I still can't write a letter to somebody.
You dictated your autobiography?
I do everything.
Yeah.
What I did with that, my autobiography, I dictated it all onto a tape, and then I had an editor who worked with me, and he read them back to me, and I said, no, I don't like that, I want this.
Okay.
And we put really quite a good book together called Winning is Not Enough, because that's a fact. Winning is not enough. You've got to do more than that. And that you've got to go beyond that too, because a lot of sports, the people who do it come to the end of their sports life and have nothing else to do. Being a racing driver, it's a lot easier because you've got car companies, you've got fuel and oil companies, you've got tyre companies, you've got advertisers that today you're involved with. But unless you deliver beyond the competition, you soon get lost, and they just don't want you anymore. So I was with Ford for 40 years. I am now with Rolex for 53 years. I'm with Moet. I was on the board for a while, till I got to a certain age, and then I wasn't allowed to be on the board. I've been with them for 52 years. So I've had long-term relationships. Ford was 40 years of very intense stuff, because they owned a lot of car companies. Jaguar, they owned Aston Martin. I was on the board of Aston Martin for a while. But I was dealing with the Japanese because they owned one of the most important Japanese companies at the time, car companies. And you went around the world with that because they owned, in America and in Australia. They had and still have the Ford Motor Companies.
Amazing.
So I would go down there to do the research and development. So that was after my retirement. But because I was a racing driver and because I had won world championships, then it was good for them to have somebody who went down in engineering that could identify correctly vehicle dynamics and be able to communicate those. And that's when you're good at dyslexia. Because when people talk to me, unless I can understand them, it doesn't come together. But when you're dyslexic, you're so intense of making sure, like I am right now with you, to get the story right. And therefore, you usually get more success out of it.
Your verbal communication to describe a feeling, it becomes better. Wow.
Because you're frightened they don't understand what you're saying. So therefore, you over-promise, or not over-promise, but you over-identify. And sometimes I say, I wish, I heard that the first time. But I don't know you heard it the first time, because I wouldn't have heard it the first time. So
interesting.
dyslexia thing had a lot to do with it, and still does
A lot
to
to
this
be who
day.
you are. Yeah, yeah. They say you should never meet your heroes, right? But however, you were in a position. What about beating your heroes, right?
Well, I didn't get that so much. I mean, my ultimate hero was Fangio, and I never raced against Fangio,
God.
obviously.
Yeah,
But he was, for me, the best example of being the really best racing driver. He drove different cars to win so many different world championships, and he only drove the best, and he only chose the best.
Yeah.
And he carried the sport so beautifully and with such dignity and style. I took him to his last resting place.
You did.
And carried him to his last resting place, and he was my ultimate hero. But Jim Clark was certainly the best racing driver I ever raced against, and I learned more from Jim. Jimmy and I were good friends.
Yeah.
So I sucked Jimmy a lot.
I bet you did.
On the basis of how do you, and he didn't like, how do you do this? He wouldn't have told me the braking distance in a Lotus Elan going into the end of the main street or the main road at Silverstone. He wouldn't tell you.
He wouldn't
that.
tell you that.
But I was seeing him. I was following him most of the time.
Yeah.
And the smoothness that he had.
So describe that, following Jimmy Clark, because he was a superlatively smooth driver.
That's why he never had the accidents that other people had
Really?
in Rolex. I mean, there are more people died in Grand Prix racing and high performance racing cars in Lotuses than any other car. And it was because they needed to be light, and sometimes the components were from production cars, but they were cheaper, so therefore he wouldn't be going to something more expensive. But he made them very well, and the Lotus was a much faster car than anybody else had at that time.
Yeah.
But Jim Clark drove it so smoothly, they never had the
He never
accidents
stretched
that
it.
other people had. And finally that accident he had could have been anything. It could have been a tyre failure, could have been anything. It wasn't because he was driving too fast, and therefore there wasn't that much being asked of the car.
Dad had breakfast with him that morning.
Yeah.
And drove into the track. Dad to this day thinks it was it was almost like a miss. You know, he had a misfire or something, and something to disturb the car. No, I was also thinking. I remember talking to Sterling Moss because Sterling became a really lovely friend to me as the son of someone, but we had a lovely friendship. And I remember asking him about what it was like when he came into racing and hit his ascendancy. And he said, well, there was another generation saying, well, we were the greatest generation. You're the new kids on the blocks. And he said, it's sort of like every generation does that.
I don't think that way. I mean, I think that Fangio was the greatest at one time. I think Sterling was the greatest at one time. I think Jim Clark was the greatest at one time.
In that moment. Yeah.
I think Schumacher was the greatest at one time. Yeah. So everybody has their window.
Yeah.
Jim Clark had his, and lots of other people were up there, but there's usually only one that's head and shoulders above the other. But I think that's all you can do. But nobody, as an individual, considers that when they're doing it. You just do the best you can. And to do the best you can, you need the best people around you.
Yeah.
So I recognised that pretty early on. Curia Cost told me that because they had really good mechanics. The same applied to Ken Tittle naturally, but everybody I drove for, when I drove for Ferrari, the factory only once it was Domenicali was the right man.
Yeah.
I mean, so therefore you hang out with the best people. If you fly with the crows, you're liable to be shot at. So therefore, it carries over to all sorts of people.
Yeah.
And that applies in business as it does in sport, and even in familiar family factors. So I learned an awful lot from a lot of people. And because you become successful, you have access to people that you would normally never be able to have access to. So, that was Sean Connery was a great friend.
Yeah.
I could never have been a great friend of Sean Connery's if I hadn't been a half decent racing driver, maybe.
Yeah.
But that applies to all sorts of people in business. Sir William Purvis, who was head of HSBC, I learned a huge amount from Sir William Purvis.
Because you're a sponge then. You're unashamedly a sponge.
No, but
your whole life.
You don't have it yourself.
Yeah.
So therefore, when you meet somebody who's got what it takes, you're thinking, "Ooh, I've got to listen to him," and therefore you use that philosophy, if you like, and that's too big a word for somebody that can't read or write.
Yeah.
But you know what you shouldn't do more than you know what you should do.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably the best thing I learned.
When you're watching people, it's interesting as cars have got they move less now, the modern cars, but I'm sure when you're watching a Formula One car from behind in another Formula One car, you're like, wow, he must be rolling his speed in there better. You watch it in the same way. Nothing's changed.
I don't think it's changed at all.
Okay.
Actually.
Yeah.
I don't think that Schumacher at the moment is probably the best driver in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he was any better or any less good than Sterling Moss or Fangio. He was the best of his time at the present time.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, sometimes if you have a very, very good car, it's almost silly not to win.
Yeah.
But you've still got to choose who you hang out with. And again, if you fly with the crows, you're liable to be shot at. So if you choose the best people, for example, Lewis has done that extremely well. Obviously, his McLaren relationship was because Ron Dennis gave him an immense amount of help and financial support to become a racing driver. But then he saw how good McLaren were. Suddenly he saw the potential of Mercedes-Benz, and their record of coming in and leaving has been very good.
Yeah.
So you choose, you choose and learn to choose the right people to be with. That's the most important thing of all.
Please tell me Sean Connery was as nice as I hope he was.
Sean Connery?
Yes.
Wonderful man.
Was he really? Because I just am a big fan, and I was always...
Oh, great. He was, first of all, without doubt, the best Bond.
He was without doubt the best Bond.
He was terrific. And he was a good man. And he was unspoiled.
Yeah.
And he was one of my best friends. I saw him not long before he died.
Yeah.
In the Bahamas.
Yeah.
I got him to the Mayo Clinic, and we probably kept him for a few more months than he might have had.
Okay, great.
But see, he was very quiet and not a pushy man at all. But yet he was just so completely good at what he did.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that.
And a good Scot.
And a good Scot, yes. Were you aware, obviously you were all young drivers. Mainly, you were all doing your thing. I love seeing the old photographs of the drivers' meetings, and you've all got your 60s hair, and there's like this vitality to all these young guys. Yeah. It must have been hot. I know the answer to this question, but rhetorically, it must have been this feeling of almost adventure together. You're traveling Europe, you're going to races, you've got beautiful girls around. It was a vibrant time.
Well, the fixes in the 70s, 60s and 70s, I think, were probably the best years of a long time.
Of the 100 years, I think.
Wonderful. The girls hardly wore any clothes, but the Beatles were there, the Stones were there, Princess Grace was there. Yeah. She would attract people coming.
They're off.
I shouldn't have brought them in the first place.
No, that's all right. Go on, guys. They'll be back in 5 minutes. Oh, no, they're off. Princess Grace was
where
like...
Was that? Yeah.
Yeah.
And what was I talking about?
We're talking about the 60s and 70s. They were so rich.
She would have people coming because of the Cannes Film Festival being on at the same time as the Monaco Grand Prix. She was a very good actress, so therefore producers came, stars came that wouldn't normally come to a motor race. And the Stones came in, like, for example, George Harrison came and became a huge friend.
To the end, you were great friends.
To the very end, because he loved driving. He loved beautiful cars. He had a McLaren and all sorts of fancy cars. But he was a genuine friend to Paul and to Mark as well as to me. And when I was away running, driving racing cars, like I was doing 60, 70 races a year in different cars, Helen would take the two of them, Paul and Mark, down to Friar Park and live with George and Livy. These sort of things you're privileged for when you've received a certain level of success, because people who are very good at things like to hang out with other people who are just as good, but they always think the other person's better than themselves. I mean, I always thought that about the really clever people that I met. They were always, I wanted to be a sponge to take in what they were saying or how they would live or what they would do. And when you are in the top end of whatever you're doing, you do get access to these people that you wouldn't normally ever be close to, whether it's the President of the United States
or an actor, or a musician,
or an actor, or an entertainer, or another type of sportsman. Muhammad Ali, for me to hang out with Muhammad Ali, for example, was terrific. Because, my God, look at this man.
When you tell the grandkids that now, they're like, you did?
and Muhammad Ali, of course, was dyslexic as well. But, a lot of these people are no longer with us.
No.
But for me, memory lane doesn't disappear.
No.
And there were very good examples to how to live and what not to do rather than what to do. So that's when you get very good at anything. You've got to be very careful you don't get carried away with your own success.
Believe your own...
And that's why when you're hanging out with even more successful people than you are, you learn so much. And to have a bunch of sycophantics as friends is a mistake. And that's what happens to a lot of people who have got success. And that's the wrong way to go. Always try to be with people who are better than you, because you're always learning from them.
You don't really want to be the smartest man in the room, do you?
No.
You want to pick on it. Again, back to this Europe in the 60s and 70s, and you're in the drivers' meetings. You're sitting there with other people. Who was your guy that you went, God, if he's on form today? It was Jim.
Jim Clark.
Okay.
Jim Clark was the best driver I ever raced against.
So he was your yardstick?
Yes, absolutely. And we were at the same time. We were both Scots. We were good friends together. But he was the best. And of course the Lotus was the fastest car, not always the best car, because it was fragile. But, people like Mario Andretti, people like Graham Hill, these were top-line racing drivers of great skills and talent. My own teammate, I had several teammates over the time, but my last teammate, who sadly died the weekend I was going to retire as a racing driver, and in fact did retire, but Francois Sever was going to be the world champion.
He would.
He was good enough to do that without having been there. So therefore, you like to have somebody like that as your teammate to bring him on from puppy stages up to where he ended at the top.
He was your
end.
George Russell.
Pardon?
He was your George Russell.
Yeah, I guess
in
so.
a way.
Yes, I mean, it was just, it was nice to see that development, and there was nothing I kept from him, and he was like a sponge. He wanted to hear about everything,
and you were only early 30s.
I retired when I was 34.
So, if people were listening to this, they're thinking of you as the granddaddy giving some young Jedi his training. You were still right at the top. You were still young, and he was young. I'm fascinated by him, though. His picture when we went to lunch is on your piano.
Yes.
That photograph is one of the most famous photographs. It shows his eyes.
Yeah, he was a great-looking guy.
He was a great-looking guy.
Did a lot of damage.
I bet. Did they line up?
Oh, the gals were forever there.
Were they really? Because he was. I've only seen a couple of interviews, and he has that a little Jackie. I see, that style, that way
very,
of
very French and
very
colourful, glamorous, exciting, good-looking, physically very
Yeah.
strong and a great physique.
yeah,
And was a very good racing driver. When he came to us, he had a lot to learn,
yeah,
but he was like a sponge, and he wanted to learn, and he wanted to ask everything from gear ratios to braking distances and he got everything he ever wanted out of me.
So you helped him on his ascendancy.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, he was great. And he would have been, because I was going to retire, he would have been the number one driver,
Yeah.
and he would have gone on to win the world
Yeah,
championship.
you just know it. But for you, that was the final straw, wasn't it?
Pardon me?
It was the final straw in a
Yes,
long list of.
It was a very sad way to end my career. I mean, I had decided in April that I would retire at the end of the season. I didn't want to let Ken Tyrrell down by stopping when I decided I no longer wanted to be a racing driver, because so many of my friends died. 57 died that were my friends.
How many?
Travelled with us, 57. Helen counted them up. Helen had been my timekeeper and my lap chart, and in those days the girls were part of the team.
Which, let's face it, as men talking about our wives, the pressure that put on behind closed doors cannot have been easy. I know it from Dad and Mum.
Yeah, sure.
There's the public side of it, and then there's that.
It's very tough. So anyway, I mean, I think from my point of view, it was time for me to retire.
Yeah.
I didn't tell Helen because I didn't want her thinking that it's 10 green bottles standing on the wall, because every Grand Prix was just another bottle coming off the wall. And Francois didn't know he was going to be number one. He had been approached by Ferrari. We had gone on holiday, Helen, he and I, to the Bahamas between the Canadian Grand Prix and the US Grand Prix, which was going to be my last race. And he said, look, I've had an approach from Ferrari for me to drive for them next year. I said, no, don't take anything at the moment. Just hold hard. They've got plenty of time. You're so good that they'll wait. Maybe they won't wait. I said, yes, they will.
Yeah.
And of course, it never happened. So that was the worst way to have an ending of a career, which was very sad because he really was one of my very best friends.
Yeah.
And for Helen, it was very sad because he was just such a, he would come and stay with us and knew the boys well. Paul and Mark loved them, etc. as puppies.
Yeah.
So, that was the very sad part of retirement. It would have been so nice to retire as world champion because that's
watch your
what I did.
protege go on and win.
But, fortunately, the sport wasn't like other sports. There was a life beyond being a driver. And because I was still with the Ford Motor Company, and Edsel Ford became one of my best friends ever, all the other Elf Aquitaine I stayed with, all the main companies, Goodyear I stayed with for nearly 20 years, and then I got picked up by ABC Wide World of Sports and Jim McKay, Wide World of Sports, the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat was the method of interrupting another program. ABC's Wide World of Sports would come on. But when you get to that level, your access, you choose the best relationships you have.
Yeah, you do.
And that's where I was lucky.
Yeah.
All the companies that I had were all blue chip companies. And that remains the same today. The relationships I have are wonderful relationships, but all with the best of their marketplace.
You talk about Indy. What was it like to walk out, effectively not under a tunnel, but walk into that pit lane, on race day for the Indy 500, which was the largest sporting event in the world at the time, it still is in a way. Different demands on you, new drivers to deal with, but is it just a car? It's just a car driving.
I never saw it in that light. I just saw it as another race.
Okay.
But it wasn't you know, you were more conscious of the downside risks.
Fair.
And how to not have an accident because you were travelling so fast all the time.
Yeah.
But Jimmy had been there before Graham and I, and we were teammates together, Graham Hill and I, with John Meekham, a wonderful man from
lovely man.
Houston, Texas. Luckily, I found it quite not difficult to drive. I had the Lola, which I think was nearly a very good car, but was certainly good enough at Indianapolis. My first Indianapolis, I think I was nearly 2 laps in the lead with only 8 laps to go when an oil pump went, and therefore I never finished the race. But I finished 6th, and I got the Rookie of the Year. Went back and was lying second ahead of AJ Foyt the next year and going well, and the car had the same mechanical failure, an oil pump that took the oil from the bottom of the sump to the top of the engine for some reason, and we lost both those races, so I missed winning at Indianapolis, that's for sure. But I then thought there was no point in doing it again, because the type of accidents that I had at Indianapolis at that time, but that's where I first wore seatbelts. You're not allowed to race at Indianapolis or even practice at Indianapolis without wearing seatbelts. So I learned that there, and as soon as, to begin with, I didn't want to wear them because they were uncomfortable. Then I suddenly realised that you had to wear them, but they weren't all that uncomfortable. So I came back and got them into Formula One. How did you get out of the end?
He's so excited. Woo woo! Come on.
You see, they're more important than you are.
Yeah, and I can see that. They're having a good time. Hey guys, come here.
You're the boss.
They know rules.
A boy and a girl. Yes, you are. You're the best.
So.
So where were we?
No, we're just saying. I mean, so Indy. I mean, not going back. Dad, when he got offered to do it, he never went and did it. But it was just like in a spate of people dying at Indy, and he just went, no, it wasn't the time.
Well, that's not what stopped me. I just thought it wasn't my scene. And Formula One was becoming so big and important, and I was working for Ford Motor Company and touring cars with the Cortina, and I was sort of, I was driving every kind of car in the world at the time. And I didn't need Indianapolis. But to begin with, I did, because financially you were earning more money in Indianapolis than you were on any other.
What did they pay to go to Indy? Do you remember?
I can't remember. It was. I remember that when I put it on the third row of the grid my first year, John Meekham took me to Texas and took me to a jeweler shop and bought me a solid gold day date.
Did he?
Rolex.
No way.
As a well done, Jackie.
Okay.
So I'll never forget that. And that was my first Rolex.
Was it?
And it wasn't until much later that I became associated with Rolex, and I've been now with them for 83 years. So, so all of these things all fitted into place. So I don't think any of it was a surprise. And
was it a surprise to you, though? Not surprise. I'm going to rephrase it. Again, you talk about these successful people, and I have friends that have, they have yachts and they have this, and I always like to ask, when you're at the helm of your yacht, metaphorically speaking, you've done what you've done and you've achieved it. I always like to wonder what it's like when people are looking back to realize that they actually achieved something that very few people get to do. And if there's an appreciation of that, because as you said earlier, people can get caught up in their own smoke, can't they, and lose touch. What was the moment for you that you probably look back and went, my God, I'm a world champion? Was it being a world champion for the first time, or?
I don't think I ever thought that way.
Really?
I mean, I was world champion, but so what? That's what we were looking towards doing, winning races. If you won enough races, you became the world champion. But I think I think it's quite difficult sometimes for some people to manage their own mind management, to not get carried away with a little bit of success, and even worse if it's a lot of success. You hang out with the right people.
Yeah.
You know, most of the people that I've become friendly with are considerably more successful than I'll ever been, or I ever have been and ever will be. And therefore you don't get carried away. You don't get
it keeps you
intoxicated
in place,
by what you've done. Everybody else seems to have done more than I have, of the friends that I really have. I mean, the odd person who, my best friend was John Lindsay, who's no longer with us, sadly. We were at school together from 9 years of age, and he was my best friend.
Yeah.
And he loved to come to Grand Prix races, but he wasn't sycophantic to Jackie Stewart. We were still the same friends as we were at 9, 10, 11 years of age.
I love that.
So that's not the same. You see, a lot of people want to hang out with success, and these are the people you actually want to avoid as much as possible.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm very lucky. I don't have a lot of friends now because of my age and the fact that so many of my friends are no longer with us.
Yeah.
The people that I do have are generally more successful than I've ever been.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's nice because I'm still learning. I'm still seeing opportunities that I never thought about that. Or isn't he terrific? Or isn't she amazing? So
you still got the curiosity that got you to where you are.
Yes, and I think you're always trying to be better than maybe you should be. I mean, I've just recently finished a big event because I'm trying to raise more money for Race Against Dementia because of Helen's illness. I need to do all of these things very well, and I want to, in my lifetime, if possible, find a cure for dementia with the type of people that I'm trying to bring together. And the only way I can do that is hang out with the best people, go to the best person of that particular area of medicine, for example, whether that person's in China or whether they're in Timbuktu. So that way you don't get carried away with a wee bit of success. And success can be very damaging. And I know a lot of people who have success and sadly have lost because of it. They've got carried away, or then they spend all their money, or they, you know, I'm Scottish, so I'm pretty careful what I do with the money, but I love to have nice things. And it's nice to have been able to afford nice things, which I would never have been able to afford as a mechanic in the wee garage. So you've got to be grateful for that. But at the same time, you don't want to get carried away with it either.
No.
So I think, again, hanging around with the right people. And if possible, people who are better at what they do than what you've done.
When we were having lunch, you talked about the PhDs you're putting together.
Yes.
It's very similar to putting together the race team. You're putting together the best people in the fastest accelerated way.
We're picking up the highest ranked PhDs in the world because we're only, and now with the internet, we're only going to the very best medical universities, the best. And out of those best universities, medical universities, we can pick up the best PhDs. Ironically, most of them are women, by the way. And we're picking them up because we can afford, and we do afford, to pay for 5 years in advance of their salaries, for 5 years, guaranteed, deposited, put in a bank that I can't touch. And therefore they've got 5 years of really good money. And therefore we put them into the best university, the best medical institutions. So therefore we've got a better chance of making this happen, to get a cure for dementia. So that's the biggest challenge I've ever faced, much more than winning Formula 1 races. That was relatively easy by comparison. So this is a bigger challenge to me. But having been through the Formula One experience, I think I'm better prepared to be able to do that than I would have been had I been Jackie Stewart, the mechanic. In the wee
Without
garage.
doubt. I wonder if, as you look back on your legacy, because, there comes a point, right, when you get to a certain age and you realize you have a legacy and you have this amazing legacy on more than one front. To young drivers, you've been such a benchmark to so many drivers, such a sort of inspiration. But then what you did with the safety, the safety angle in Formula One and motorsports is arguably the biggest legacy you will leave. Or maybe the Alzheimer's will,
you
actually.
You don't see that for yourself.
No,
I don't think...
it's not your legacy.
Once you start thinking about being that person, I think you start getting a bit carried away with the whole picture. I think every day is another challenge, still to this day, and you've got to do it better. If I'm talking about my home, I want that to be as good a home as I would ever want to have, and as comfortable as I want to have, and I like the paintings that I would love to have.
Yeah.
So if I keep doing that, I'm more than happy at how it's been going along. But big trees blow over. It only depends on the strength of the wind.
Yeah.
So you've got to still develop. You've still got to develop, and you've still got to do it better than Tom, Dick, or Harry.
Yeah.
So therefore, as long as you start, if you keep thinking like that, if you start thinking, well, I did that very well, and we are the best, there's always somebody going to beat you. It doesn't matter what area of life you're in, business or sport or medicine. You've got to. You can't start thinking that you're the best. And every time you do something, you're trying to do it better than you've done it before. Not necessarily better than somebody else, because the other person might not be that good, he or she.
That's true.
So it's you've got to raise your game all the time, and that's what we're trying to do with Race Against Dementia. We're trying to get these young PhDs, because the current geniuses, so to speak, have failed. For 40 to 50 years they've failed. There is no cure for dementia. And the statistic now tells you that for everyone born today, 1 out of 3 are going to die with dementia, because there's no preventive medicine and there's no corrective medicine. We've got to change that. Not me, Jackie Stewart. We've got to do it because of the talent that we've got. The talent that I can afford, because we're getting people come in and giving us large sums of money to help us find that goal. Because sometimes their parents or best friends have died of dementia or Alzheimer's. So therefore, this is the biggest thing I've ever taken on my life. Much bigger than motor racing. And if we get to win or get further than anybody else has done, it'll be because of the people that I'm hanging out with, the people I'm finding who are the best. So I think there's always right round the corner a challenge that you've got to overcome.
Yeah.
And the biggest challenge right now facing me is to find a cure for Helen.
Yeah, it really is. Just looking back right to the beginning, or all the way through, as an observer, many of your fans and contemporaries even might look at your career and go, he just shot up, it was great, but you were working it out as you went along, the same as everyone else. When you put the helmet on, you're working it out. Is there anything that you could have, that Jackie Stewart now, if he could whisper in the ear of Jackie Stewart then, could have been of help, or any advice you'd have given yourself, or things you might have done better?
I'm pretty comfortable as to how we went about it, or I went about it. I had Helen, we've been married for 50 odd years. We've had very good friendships. We've had very good bankers and accountants. We've had very good partners. And I think because I was world champion at the time that I was doing it, and at that time death was rushed round the corner almost every week, somehow or other it's a different way of thinking about how what you're going to do next. And in this particular case, I loved the conversion from being the driver to the relationship with whatever sponsors I had. Or, you know, again, you choose the best ones. I mean, with Rolex, I think I've got the best company in the world of its kind.
Yeah.
And likewise, I'm hanging out with some of the cleverest people in the world because of that. And it's whether it's them or whether it's the Willie Purvises of this world at that time, HSBC. And therefore I'm still have access and get into the doors of people who I would normally, under normal circumstances, never be able to get close to. And because of my past and what's happened to me, I can generally reach out to these people, and as long as I don't try to take advantage of them, I can learn further, and therefore maybe get things done in a better fashion, a faster way, or whatever. But I think that's fairly straightforward. I don't think that's being clever. I mean, that's just being
using what you have, using what you have around you.
And I don't think you should ever be very comfortable about what you've done in the past. I mean, it's what you're doing currently and what you might do
even
in the
now.
future. And you shouldn't be getting carried away with a wee bit of success, because success gets disappeared very quickly.
If this was a book and this was a script and you had one last line on the way out the door, what would it be to the Jackie Stewart story?
Well, to be yourself, and always I think to think the other people that you have around you are better at doing whatever they do than you ever were about what you do. You know, I think I still love meeting people who have been hugely successful. I always get something out of it, something that I didn't have before. Once you start thinking you're better than anybody else, I think that's when you start going down the hill. But I'm trying to think of something to answer you in that, in 1, 2 or 3 words. And I've lost it at the moment.
That's okay.
The older I get, the more likely it is for me to lose something that I nearly had.
It's the I guess the way I'm trying to say it, if there was your message, the message to the world as you, the last sort of, you know, your motto for life, your meaning of life.
Yes, maybe sometimes it's to be able to do something that everybody else thinks that you've done better. You know, and you know that it wasn't all that good. There's always something that you could do better. And I think as long as you can think like that, you won't go far wrong.
Jackie, I love doing this. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Pleasure.
Yeah, it really was. Well,
it was a good 10 minutes.
It was a good 10 minutes, eh? That was fun. Thank you. That was so.